Welcome to Curious Coffee Conversations with NASA.
Hello, cerebral wanderers and listening entities. Our coffee, their feeds, one shared curiosity.
I absolutely love that opening. I'm Lucy, and I'm thrilled to be sitting here with NASA. Now, NASA, looking at your background, you are a director at a professional services firm with over 13 years leading audits for various companies, including large financial institutions at KPMG and PwC. I am assuming you would have spent years on auditing and advising clients on strengthening governance and regulatory compliance.
Yes, I have led various audits and transformation initiatives, not only for organizations that we're consulting for, but I've also played key roles in transforming initiatives at audit as a business. Further, I have advised clients on financial reporting best practices and technology-driven workflow transformations. And today's conversation draws deeply from that experience. When I first started my career, I was just a curious kid with a head full of textbooks, desperately seeking answers to what I now realize were naive questions. A decade later, I look at the incredible pace of complex technology adoption, and my whole approach has flipped. I don't start with the use case, the what can it do? Instead, I find myself asking the far more subjective and frankly more interesting question: how did we decide AI should be used in this area? That is the heart of today's discussion. Should it do that? Now, companies might be thinking about handing keys over to AI, often treating it like a magic crystal ball. But the history of automation is littered with examples of what happens when we prioritize speed over safety.
To prove that point, let's look at a quick timeline of where we've gotten this wrong, starting back in 2012. A decade ago, a trading algorithm misfired order after order, uncontrolled, unmonitored, unstoppable.
45 minutes later, $440 million was erased from existence. Why? No kill switch, no model validation, no oversight. And we still deploy Gen AI agents today without mandatory controls.
Next up, one of 2024's wildest stories. A video call, a perfect face, a perfect voice. Except the CFO wasn't real, and the finance team wired over $25 million.
This is what happens when authentication lags behind imitation. Deepfakes plus corporate workflows equals a perfect storm of social engineering and technical failure.
And then my personal favorite. The Air Canada chatbot hallucinated a refund rule, and the court forced the airline to honor it.
And this ties directly to a core principle that I address in my research. If AI speaks on behalf of an organization, the organization is accountable, not the algorithm.
Should it do this? That cuts right to the heart of the matter. Before we dive into the details of the report, let's acknowledge the noise. AI is the only conversation in the room. Everyone is talking about adoption, use cases, and emphatically, the billions being poured in by tech giants.
And that noise, Lucy, is generated by vested interests. Let's be clear, big tech and the large consulting firms have a tangible historical reason to aggressively push this initial wave of adoption. If you step back and look at history, the entities that accrue massive generational wealth are always those who seize control of the defining resource of that era, be it oil, the internet's infrastructure, or any other paradigm shift. These shifts don't just create value, they fundamentally reshape humanity for generations. AI could absolutely be the next one. The only difference for me, I don't see it as a revolutionary flash, but rather an evolutionary force that is already shaping the landscape of control. And that evolution is happening right now, in real time. We are learning from AI, and crucially, AI is learning about us. Because natural language processing is now so advanced, we are able to interact with these models as if we are talking to another human without having to use predefined programming commands. That changes everything.
That is an interesting way to look at it. Okay, let's take that concept of evolving control and ground it in a real-world use case, one that could affect millions of people's financial lives right now. Where is this power of AI being used in the most subjective and potentially risky ways? I'm curious about specifically this use case, where financial institutions may be allowed to use AI to do the credit scoring.
Sure. To understand the risk, you have to look at the pressure. Imagine a major financial institution, a bank, under immense pressure to speed up its lending process. They want fast decisions for millions of applications, so they deployed an advanced AI model. This isn't just a simple algorithm. This is a complex system designed to automate credit scoring, set precise loan limits, and determine interest rates. On the surface, it's a technological marvel. Faster, more efficient, seemingly objective. Everyone celebrates the efficiency gains. But then the system was audited. Regulators, or perhaps internal auditors, decided to look closer, not at how fast it worked, but at the patterns in its final decisions.
What did they find?
They found that customer A and customer B, who had remarkably similar financial profiles, identical income, similar debt levels, were getting vastly different credit limits. The model was consistently setting significantly lower limits for one specific demographic group. It wasn't because the model intended to discriminate. It discriminated because it learned from historically biased data. The model was simply looking at the bank's past lending decisions, decisions that, perhaps decades ago, were influenced by human bias, and seeing a pattern. That group was historically less likely to be given large loans. So the AI concluded that the safest, most efficient pattern for the bank was to perpetuate that past biased outcome data.
So it learned to be biased. It discriminated.
Exactly. The model was basically denying loans or lowering limits disproportionately to one demographic group. That's the real danger when we use these evolutionary systems in subjective areas. They become powerful automated mirrors of our worst historical flaws.
That is profoundly disturbing. It shifts the ethical burden, doesn't it? We didn't program the bias in explicitly, but by prioritizing efficiency, we essentially allowed the machine to automate our ethical failures. So when we look at that kind of outcome, a system that's fast and profitable but demonstrably unfair, we're brought right back to our original question. Forget, can it score credit this fast? Should it do that?
Precisely. And that question is critical because this isn't an isolated problem confined to banks. The mechanism we just described, where historical bias is coded into future power, is repeating across healthcare, hiring, and criminal justice. The challenge is deciding where the line is drawn. It's about designing an ethical framework for a technology that is evolving faster than our ability to regulate it. The next part of the podcast dives into those specific ethical red lines. Think about it. With no explainability layer, it is a black box. Especially financial services, it is not optional. It is core responsibility.
Right, and that makes this conversation hyper relevant here and now because the GCC isn't moving slowly. We're seeing national AI strategies, massive government AI programs, sector-level deployments, and billions in R&D investment. The speed and scale of adoption in this region are unprecedented. This context is exactly what sparked your curiosity, isn't it? Tell us about your research report. What exactly is it, and why did you decide to focus on the AI policies?
My report is titled, Should It Do That? GCC AI Policy Maturity and Governance, the Global Comparison. I initiated it precisely because of that speed, and out of a genuine curiosity to assess the practical state of play here. The background data is telling. Across the GCC, AI adoption is accelerating faster than organizational maturity. Market research shows 84% of firms already use AI, yet only 11% actually realize measurable value. I wanted to move beyond the theoretical understanding and map that reality. The report presents a structured assessment of AI policy maturity across the GCC countries, benchmarked against 4 globally influential jurisdictions: the European Union, Singapore, China, and the United States.
What was the primary objectives your research report really seek to achieve?
Analysis is driven by 2 primary objectives. First, to quantify the relative maturity of the aggregated GCC policy framework across 10 critical domains, and second, to provide a nuanced analysis of the strategic governance and institutional gaps that currently inhibit the region from fully realizing its high value potential.
And what criteria did you use to define that maturity?
I examined the strategic commitment, institutional capacity, and regulatory depth across 10 specific domains. These ranged from AI ecosystem development and skills and talent to critical areas like ethical AI and governance principles and the human-centric AI approach. I used only publicly available policy documents like the UAE's AI 2021, KSA's NSDAI, and comparable global documents.
What was the scoring methodology you used to objectively assess and compare policy status across jurisdictions?
I used a simple 4-point scale from 0 to 3 to compare how mature AI policies are. A 3 means strong enforceable AI rules are already in place. A 2 means there's a clear strategy but mostly guidelines rather than hard laws. A 1 means the ideas exist but implementation is still weak. And 0 means it's very early, mostly plans and pilot projects.
So, after all that structured scoring and comparative analysis, what was the most significant outcome? What did this research ultimately reveal about the GCC's policy maturity in AI?
The report clearly indicates that while the region is advancing rapidly in investment and ecosystem development, governance frameworks remain uneven and often limited to soft law principles. I found that while there is universal intent and massive investment in the technology capabilities across GCC, but there is a lag in the development and implementation of the necessary guardrails. But without binding enforceable regulation, maturity gets stuck at advanced, not leading.
Exactly. The investment is advanced. We're talking about billions in value. But with all that acceleration, the biggest constraint now is the absence of binding governance.
Precisely. We have strategies and ethical guidelines which are great, but they are voluntary. We need to move towards enforceable statutes, actual law to protect market integrity. Because without that safety net, a $25 million deepfake scam isn't just a possibility, it's a probability.
That really makes you pause. Okay, so this is about avoiding catastrophic financial loss, not just being polite. For the leaders listening, what are the top 3 actions they need to take right now?
1. Assign a board-level AI owner. Someone needs to be ultimately accountable if the AI goes rogue. 2. Build a full AI system inventory. You can't govern what you can't see. This is critical for responsible AI and the audit trail, especially in heavily regulated sectors like banking. And 3. Move from strategy to statute. We need to codify these rules into law to enable true safe scaling.
Board owner, inventory, and statute. That is a robust framework. Thank you for this necessary and urgent conversation, NASA. It's clear this is not a destination, but a journey we're all on. And I look forward to seeing how these frameworks evolve over the next year. This is a space where the questions we ask today might be obsolete tomorrow, but the principle of should it do that will always remain the constant. Dear listeners, we will link the full research report, the visual slides, and the YouTube video in the show notes for everyone who wants to dive deeper.
Thanks, Lucy. Here's to the questions that move us forward, human or AI. May we keep learning together, one coffee conversation at a time.